Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Well, hello, everybody. Are you ready? I certainly am. Boy, if people weren't awake before yesterday, they're awake now. Do you know why the Oval Office is oval? It's that unusual shape because it reflects the design that George Washington actually wanted. He created that space, an oval space, in his earlier presidential home in Philadelphia before we actually built the White House. He didn't live in the White House. But the design of his oval room in his place inspired the architect of the White House to create what was called the Blue Room, which is an oval. And then in the early 1900s, when they actually built the Oval Office, it was modeled on that room. Washington, he believed the shape was more egalitarian than the traditional throne rooms in Europe. People would be equidistant from the president, so no rank was imposed by proximity. It didn't have corners where the least favored could be banished. The whole idea of equality is literally designed into the shape of the most important room in the United States. And that is where Donald Trump chose to sell us out. In the Oval Office, a room designed by George Washington to reflect the ideas of liberty and equality, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance very publicly switched teams in the middle of a war. The whole world saw it. The whole world saw Donald Trump as Putin's muscle, a cheap mob enforcer, not an American president. It was a disgusting betrayal of our country and a gift to Vladimir Putin. Because of Trump, our government has changed sides in a war. But because we are better than he is, Americans have not. All over, people were just pouring out support for Zelensky, for Ukraine, and disgusted by that man. And, we know the cause of peace is strengthened when we stand up for human freedom, not when we appease aggressors. We know the world is safer when war criminals are prosecuted rather than protected. Oh, and Putin is a war criminal. His unprovoked attack on democratic Ukraine has flattened hospitals and schools. He's targeted and destroyed more than 10% of the entire housing stock in Ukraine. He's stolen Ukrainian children and sent them to be raised as Russians. He regularly tortures Ukrainian POWs and engages in widespread sexual abuse meant to humiliate the men in captivity. This is a monster. Yet with cameras rolling, Trump and Vance decided that didn't matter. They lectured President Zelensky. Then they kicked him out of the White House. Then they sent their propaganda team out to blame him for the insult. All of it was live streamed by TASS, the Russian propaganda agency, whose reporters were invited into the Oval Office even as the White House banned the Associated Press from the room. There is no Russia hoax. This man is absolutely in sync with Vladimir Putin. And you know what? Until yesterday, Putin was under incredible pressure back in Russia. His economy is weak. Russia's losses are staggering in the war, too huge to hide. And inflation, in part because of American sanctions, is out of control. But yesterday, Mr. Putin got a lifeline, the PR gift of a lifetime. He delivered America to his side. I'm disgusted, and I hope you are too. But on cue, former Russia hawks, people like Senator Lindsey Graham, that profile in mush, rushed to the first available microphone to denounce Zelensky and in effect to tell him to resign. On cue, Republicans in Congress deleted all their previous posts, the ones that proudly supported Zelensky in Ukraine. As soon as their own dear leader pointed in a different direction, these American Politburo members couldn't jump fast enough to get away from their own professed, deeply held values. Shameful, weak, disloyal, disgusting. There was a time when Republicans not only shared American values, they championed them, even in the face of Russian threats. Do you remember this? Paul, play this. Do you remember this? Yep.
Welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Yeah, that was Berlin. That was an American president, a Republican, standing up to the Soviet Union, nuclear armed, more powerful than Mr. Putin, and saying, your time is done, buddy. Tear down the Berlin Wall. Open up. We don't have that kind of courage, not in the White House. Because of Trump, America, our government, is now on one side of a war and our people are on the other. He chose Putin. We still stand for human freedom and against brutal aggression. And we aren't alone. Overnight, leaders, citizens, media from the entire free world condemned the White House spectacle and doubled down on their support in Ukraine. Our government is isolated, as powerful as it is, and Americans and our government are alienated. Mr. Trump's embrace of naked power over any kind of principle has damaged America and the world. Many believe the fight for a just and lasting peace there in Ukraine is now irreversibly undermined. Indeed, the world has gotten a lot more dangerous. And look, Mr. Trump's vision is an old vision. It's an imperial path, a world where powerful dictators divide up the globe. It's not new. I'll take Greenland. I'll take Panama. You take Ukraine. You maybe can have, I don't know, you can have Taiwan, but I want Canada. Seriously? We've been here before. That's what the European powers did in the world through and all the way through, till about 1900. And the bloodiest 50 years in human history were the result. 2 enormous world wars. That's why America led in the creation of a different kind of way of organizing nations, a rules-based order enforced by a beneficial power rather than a power-based order enforced by the whims of rulers. Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance want to sweep all of that away. And you know what? The only winner, and it's a short-term win, but the only winner is Putin. And that sheds new light on Trump's domestic attacks as well, because the undermining of the rule of law, the vast and rampant corruption, the threats to our free press, to our systems of education, all look like efforts to weaken America in ways only Putin could love. That clip I played you, Ronald Reagan, standing there before the Berlin Wall, that took courage. That took courage. What Donald Trump did, that was just disgusting. We are now in this terrible place where our president and our government are fighting on one side of a war and our people are on the other. And that's not just about Ukraine. Mr. Trump is weaponizing the coercive powers of government right here at home, the FBI, the Justice Department, the military, to fight this war against us. to fight against the idea of liberty and equality, to fight against what makes us exceptional. To quote a general in a different time, nuts. Americans see what's going on. And if Trump is afraid of Putin, well, wait until he sees what we Americans can do. Take a break. I got a great show for you, beginning with an interview that was fascinating, but I recorded it right before that meeting in the White House. So that won't be its subject, but it's pretty good. And I'll be back live right after. Stay tuned.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, I am thrilled to be joined by Jonathan Katz, who's the Senior Director for the Anti-Corruption, Democracy, and Security Project at Brookings. He's done enormous work on anti-corruption work, national security, and democracy both at home and abroad. He's held positions in the government, at the State Department, at, guess what, USAID. He's worked in Congress. He was a national security fellow working for Senator Amy Klobuchar. He's been at the German Marshall Fund. Really, he knows the democracy world, and it's crumbling. So I'm delighted to talk to him. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and this is an incredibly timely conversation. So
timely, but you saw it coming. I mean, you guys wrote this democracy playbook at the very beginning of this and released it, and I saw it, and it really talked about the things we need to do to defend democracy here at home. And it had if I recall correctly, it had 7 pillars to focus on. Could you tell us what those are?
Yeah, and just again, I want to say that we weren't the only ones who were thinking about democracy, because many of us had worked on.
We're all terrified.
And sort of concerns about what would take place in the U.S. if Trump came back to power, because many of us worked together in the first Trump administration, the scholars and experts that we turned to help inform this playbook to address these challenges over 5-6 years ago. And many of us have also worked on addressing democracy backsliding globally, and we saw these same trends happening here in the United States, not only at the national level, but at the state levels in the United States. So when we saw that polling numbers in the summer of last year, we knew that there was a real possibility that democracy would be at risk in the United States. Rule of law would be at risk. Future elections would be at risk. The issues revolving around corruption and transparency and accountability of the state, really important. And so we, in writing this, looked at some of the key pillars, 7 pillars to defend democracy, we thought would be critical as the new second Trump administration were to come into place. And so we focused on seven pillars: protecting elections, defending rule of law, fighting corruption, reinforcing civic and media space, protecting pluralistic governance, countering disinformation, and making democracy deliver economically for the American people, whether you're in Chicago or if you're in Alaska. That it is critically important that you have a transparent, accountable economy that is also addressing inequalities that we see within the system and that are going to be exacerbated by an administration that is run by billionaires. So we've been thinking hard about how to connect these things.
Jonathan, the choice of those pillars is interesting to me. I was actually preparing to interview somebody else who had given a whole list of Trump actions and had categorized them in a certain way. But the categorization wasn't quite yours. It was a little different. All of these actions that we see the Trump administration fall into the categories you've laid out. And I hear them and I think, wow, these are the same areas that Orban went after in Hungary to destroy its democracy. So I look at him, I think, wow, you picked those areas because you know that's how democracies get overturned.
Yeah, and this is while there's a democracy playbook, there's also an autocracy playbook and network that has been strengthened over the past almost 2 decades now, where if you look at measurements of democracy scores globally, you see them moving in the wrong direction, or the rise of strongmen like Orban or Erdogan in Turkey, Putin, and now Trump. Many people believe, and that's why that the playbook has been laid out. Trump is following this playbook and how he acts and how he, as we pointed out, there are cracks in these pillars because of the steps that they're taking to undermine things like rule of law, or firing the inspector generals across the U.S. government in order to have no eyes and ears on how taxpayer dollars are spent, so they can spend it in a way that they think is beneficial to Trump and his administration. And that's what we're calling out. And all these will have consequences or be impactful in communities across the United States, and you're starting to see that pushback from these communities. The headline of one article I read this morning was Republicans no longer will hold town hall meetings because of the pushback that they're getting from constituents about deep funding cuts and what's happening in Washington.
Right. You will expect to see those town halls begin when they can figure out how to have a studio audience that they have pre-cleared to show up, but not real voters for sure. So Jonathan, these measures that you're talking about, I'm familiar with the EIU definitions or the Freedom House measures of democracy around the world. And I know there are others, but they all hinge on these questions of rule of law, of respect for democratic processes. And I look at what Trump is doing, and I see it as a validation of how good democracies can be, because his efforts seem entirely focused on entrenching the power that he has so that he stays there and that his party will stay there forever. And yet the side effects of that are devastating for Americans. It almost proves that the opposite, when you actually have a functioning democracy, it has constituents and it has to deliver for them.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's where we talk about that. That's our 7th pillar as well. And I think we've seen in autocracies even the economic impact of policies that dramatically affect the livelihoods of individuals within these countries, and it's largely due also to things like state capture or corruption. Mm-hmm. And because as a anti-corruption project focused globally, we measure these things and look at other indexes like the Corruption Perception Index, run by one of the partners that we work closely with, Transparency International, and we can see the devastating impacts locally of how corruption impacts safe drinking water or safety of our transportation, bridges, schools. And so we're trying to carefully sort of lay out what these impacts are. So I think that Americans could understand exactly what you said, how important it is to have rule of law and to have the government respect checks and balances. And that's something that we're not seeing. We're seeing a Congress that is backing away from its oversight of the executive branch or to hold them accountable. We see a judiciary that's being ignored by this administration, who is basically saying, the president and the vice president are saying, we're going to ignore what the courts are saying and we're going to steamroll them. And this is also partially because Congress is not acting in the way that it needs to act and provide oversight. So all these pieces are really wobbly right now. The checks and balances, rule of law, the possibility and opening for corruption, And it worries. It's really worrisome to see, for example, in the Department of Defense, where you see Elon Musk and others that have contracts before DoD actually getting into the books and maybe predetermining how billions of dollars are going to be spent. And I know maybe in the conversation, this also means jobs for Americans in the communities where things are made, or there are ancillary businesses that are directly connected to where this funding goes as well. It's critical. And so I think it will touch everything from arts and culture all the way to if you're working for Boeing in Washington and the president decides next week that he wants to cancel a contract and give it to Elon Musk without transparent and accountability means to do so. So if you ignore the judiciary, you don't have to worry about these things. And that's what we're hearing from this administration.
I mean, Americans hate corruption. Even if it is petty, they hate it in their elected officials. I live in Chicago. I mean, I am very familiar with political corruption, the small C kind, like, give me a few $100s and I'll give you a curb cut for your driveway, which is how aldermen have gone to jail forever in this town. And people hate it. I mean, and state capture, we have it in our states all over the place. I mean, and I'm thinking particularly in the Midwest of, Ohio and here of captures of public utility commissions by the utilities they're supposed to regulate. And for people, that means you're just paying higher rates every month that you don't really need to pay to get the services that are mediocre anyway.
Yeah, I think this we saw in polling numbers. We highlight this in the playbook, the democracy playbook, the 2025 democracy playbook. We highlight the polling data on corruption, and you're absolutely right. Americans absolutely they know it, they oppose it, and they're concerned about it. And I think what we have today, though, is an ability, something to overcome, which is the sort of abuse of this language, including by President Trump and others, to really sort of tar and feather others with that same language in a way that creates muddy waters, or the inability for the public to know what's real and what is not. That's why we talk about countering disinformation or responding to that within the media cycles that we're in platforms, including social media. And so I think that the challenge really is to be able to break through the din, this feedback loop, but the ability to explain to the public about why your bills are high, or whether it's at the local level, but also how does the president, the things that are happening in Washington directly impact the things that people care about, and to break through, I think, a very difficult wall of information. And it's no wonder that the Washington Post this week, and Jeff Bezos said, we're no longer going to do opinion pieces anymore that tackle the most difficult issues that Americans are concerned about, because I think on one hand, it's, sort of obeying and trying to please what we believe is pleasing Trump or others, and sort of that piece of the political puzzle. But also it's about what are, sort of traditional media and the ability, even for a Washington Post, which played a critical role during the first Trump administration, shedding light on corruption, shedding light on other activities in the White House that weren't, that were not in the interest of the American people. They were critically important. But today, even the Washington Post struggles, I think, as other maybe traditional media struggles to break through.
Well, look,
Bezos did say, I just want to say, Bezos did say in his statement, he said, like the social media platforms dominate media, and we're giving up.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that specifically. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why a busy man like you takes time to go on shows like this to help get this word out, because the traditional media it is not up to the world we're in. partly because most people get their news from, their crazy uncle who saw it on Facebook, or somebody sends them something in their feed directly. They get it from each other these days. So we have to talk to each other in ways we have not been used to for many, many generations. The Washington Post giving up, in a sense, is a terrible. I mean, it's like losing a city in a war. It's like the march of autocracy has knocked it off another defense, broken through another line. And I wonder, how we are able to stop them. And I think your focus on the actual impact this is having on our lives may be the only way. I don't know that Americans actually care about democracy. I don't think we don't teach it. We don't really think about it very much. We took it for granted, like air and water. And I know that, in campaign polling, the democracy doesn't poll as high as the price of eggs.
Yeah, we did find, though, when asked about this question of democracy, when asked, both Democrats and Republicans raised concerns about it. They're concerned about the loss of democracy, but they're coming at it, I think, maybe, as you're pointing out, from different perspectives. And I think we've all maybe taken for granted that these incredible systems, yet imperfect, government institutions that always need to have reform and be looked at in that way and scrutinized. That's what the American public should do. That's what Congress is supposed to do. That they have been critical to America's success, and it doesn't mean that everybody has benefited from the system. And I think that's a fair criticism. What we're looking at in this playbook too is, and we're pointing out, is that we're not without hope, and we're not without action. And so we have spent a lot of time, even within this, without the power to address these challenges, but also to get ahead. How do we take this moment to build the system back in a way that is better representative of the American people and their interests? Things that maybe things have been broken in just 1 month in a fundamental way. And it's an opportunity in the middle of a crisis for institutions like ours, Brookings and others, to not only talk about the frontline battles of this moment, but also thinking about how we rebuild this back to be something that's better than it has been. And because we and it includes things like civic education and how we teach our children and the next generation about the system and why they have a responsibility within the system. But right now, as we're speaking, we see groups active across the entire United States, responding. We see the litigation, and we see successful litigation happening. We see the voices, Republicans, Democrats, and independents at rallies, at town hall meetings that I spoke about, that some Republicans seem to be unwilling to go into now because they know that their communities are being impacted and they're not doing the right thing to address the needs of their own communities. So we're spending not only the time talking and showing where those cracks are, we're thinking and writing about how you actually build this back, strengthen these institutions, and recognize that we're in a new moment. And with this crisis, there's also some opportunity. And I also just want to make sure that for those who are thinking about how do you engage, whether it's at the citizen level or civil society, that there are democracy actors that we point out across the United States that are critically important at this moment to speak to those issues and to reach out, as you said, talk neighbor to neighbor in a church, or if they're in a Rotary Club, but also sort of connecting it to this larger challenge. And we highlight those democracy defenders, as we call them, in a number of our recent, including the Democracy Playbook. And we use examples globally of countries that have come back from autocracies.
or
governments that have been Poland is a prime example. But we also want to highlight that how difficult it is when the damage is done to systems and internally. It is incredibly difficult to repair that damage and then strengthen it going forward. And so I think I think we understand that this is a very significant moment for U.S. democracy, and that things may not be able to be put back together exactly the way that they were before, but we'll have to have a new American democracy. And how that looks going forward has to take into account the major cracks and the strategy that has been put in place to undermine that democracy, and how do we safeguard that going forward, understanding that there will always be somebody seeking to exploit the cracks, whether it's corruption or governance. I think we won't get to perfect, but we have to aim to be perfect.
Jonathan, listening to you, what I hear is the same kind of language that was used as we were in the midst of and towards the end of the Civil War, when we knew the North knew it was going to win, that said, we can't put back together what we had. It didn't do the job, and it didn't give us the power in government to build the society we need to build and to build the democracy we need to build. We need some fundamental change. And that led to 3 amazing constitutional amendments that altered America and changed made us a more democratic country and a stronger one. The kinds of changes that we may need may require very big structural change like that. What's your thinking about? I mean, for me, I think if Congress votes, if the Democrats get control of Congress and simply vote, I guess as the Supreme Court instructed them to, that Donald Trump violated his oath of office and engaged in insurrection, then he and everybody who supported that insurrection are immediately tossed out of office, and we can pass the kinds of laws that you think we should pass in their absence, maybe not a constitutional amendment, but big changes, including maybe eminent domain, taking of Mar-a-Lago and turning it into a research center on American fascism.
I think you point out some really important things, and I think the sort of post-Civil War period is instructive on how things. Obviously, had it been Lincoln versus, had he not been assassinated, you may have seen a different set of laws and approach post-Lincoln. As you recall, that led to sort of Jim Crow, but also years of repression of different communities that took decades to overcome.
100 years. Yeah.
Some of which this administration is rolling back some of those civil rights era laws or seeking to, and that's instructive. But I think we think of these things as sort of demands of what the public might want to see have happen. Some of them would have to be constitutional amendments, which are, I dare say, are incredibly difficult to achieve based on both Congress and then sort of states, and to move that forward. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be discussed or put out there right now. I can think of 2 things that really should matter to Americans. They should understand this, and I think they do. One is the issue of pardon power. And I think I bring this up because I think it's tied to these 2 demands that I think Americans might get behind, which is no pardon power, no presidential immunity. Meaning that I think this president feels particularly emboldened by the Supreme Court ruling on immunity, and then understands that he has pardon power, and this is for Democrats, Republican. No president should have the ability to pardon murderers like January 6th, those that were responsible for violence that took place, and then also be able to use that and say, my administration can do what it wants to do. I'll just pre-pardon everybody. And I think Biden, unfortunately, set an example for this. So I don't think it's just Trump alone. And this is, we won't go down that full rabbit hole, but it's no Democrat or Republican, no American should have absolute pardon power that would enable them to do horrific things like, pardon a January 6th.
Create a vigilante army, right? That shouldn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what's worrisome, I think, for many here is that because the administration is not necessarily adhering or is butting heads with the judiciary, and whether they will comply with, what the Supreme Court or other federal courts are saying is really up in the air. I think that is largely due to the fact that Trump believes that he has immunity from what he and his administration can do. And then he has the ability to pardon anyone in his administration, whether it's the 25-year-old Elon Musk staffer who's taking critical data from the Treasury Department or Social Security Administration, that touches the lives of every American. And, or if it's, the head of, Pete Hegseth, they decide to give a contract to Musk that later started to be,
Starlink,
was it? Yeah. How do you hold people accountable? And in this system right now, I think Americans would say no one should have pardon power. No president should have immunity. President's not king. And I think that's something that Americans, they can't do on their own. They can't pardon themselves. And certainly if somebody were to do something to them, they certainly would like rule of law to be carried out and those to be held accountable.
About the rule of law, let me ask, do you think we need a fourth branch of government? Do you think we need to hive off the Justice Department and make it independent of the president? Because today it sure looks like the Justice Department is a coercive arm of the party in power, and it is not pursuing cases of crimes against their members, and it is hunting for cases against political opponents. This is first-rate autocratic behavior. Do we need a fourth branch? Some countries have it, where the Justice Department is independent of the president.
Yeah, the independence of the judiciary, whether in the United States or any other democracy, is absolutely a critical component of both checks and balances, rule of law, and we have this, and we've had this in the United States, and it has held, but now it certainly is threatened. The fox guarding the hen house, as we see with the Justice Department, that is politicized and weaponized, is incredibly problematic. Same thing with the FBI and Kash Patel. I don't think that has been fully unleashed yet, but I would expect that you're going to see that type of weaponization coming out both from DOJ and from the FBI. I think that when we talk about democracy renewal going ahead, we are going to have these hard conversations about how we ensure whether the judiciary remains separate, that the prosecutorial powers of DOJ not turned against the American people or perceived political enemies. I think it's all on the table. And so this moment in time says we need to go back, get under the hood and sort of rethink about what this is going to look like going forward, because of the examples that are being set right now, even in this past 4 weeks, have really changed the dynamics. And so you will need Congress to act to be part of this. And, you may have a judiciary, as we see in other countries, that sort of rejects these changes because they support whether it's, executive powers or is more closely aligned with, an autocracy in power. And we see this in a number of countries where,
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. You talked about the actions this administration is taking to roll back Democratic protections or even those rights that were won after the Civil War. And I can't let that moment go without asking you about the Roberts Court and its legacy. John Roberts has made a career of trying to destroy the Voting Rights Act, and he effectively has finally. And Citizens United, I think, is probably more than any other decision the one that is the reason that our Congress is not doing the job that I think the founders thought would be inconceivable of not checking a tyrant in power.
Yeah, I think it's clear the court has made decisions that have enabled
this moment.
Whether we talk about sort of U.S. elections, the role of money in elections. Musk is a great example of what you don't want in an election. You don't want a billionaire, multi-billionaire to fund an election, use their media platform to advance policies, and then place within the administration to wipe out sort of U.S. pillars of government that have been there for centuries, not just decades, or laws. Trample on that. Of course, the modern era now, data and data control is as important as anything else. Have access to things that he shouldn't, and then have nobody really there to hold him accountable. But the money in politics is something that we write about addressing this piece because it's corrosive. It does not level. There's no level playing field, and this is both for Democrats and Republicans alike, of really getting that money out of the electoral system. That's why we highlight as the number one pillar our elections, to ensure that they're safe, secure, transparent, and that you aren't able to use the resources to tip the balance of an election in a direction that is beneficial to that individual named Elon Musk. So it's really problematic. So the Roberts Court, obviously, there's an imbalance in terms of its approach on elections. The ruling on immunity, quite disconcerting.
Disgusting. Yeah. So you say concerning. I'm going to say disgusting. Yeah.
And of course, it certainly factors into how Trump is approaching this administration and what they're doing and why they feel they have impunity to act in the way that they're acting right now, with very little to see in response, a checks and balance to this. I think Trump thinks he can go to the courts and have the Supreme Court, the Roberts Court, affirm what they're doing. And
or at least not stop
we haven't
it fast
seen that
enough.
tested yet.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're running out of time. I guess I think the structures of our democracy that were meant to protect us have broken. I think John Roberts is responsible for breaking them with the help of Republican money that he unleashed, and that the only thing that will save our democracy are the American people if they care to do so. And that is going to come up in the next election and the one after it, where they're going to have to turn out in numbers that overwhelm the efforts to purge voter rolls that are going on in states, and overwhelm the efforts to suppress votes that are going on in the states. That's our last chance, I think. And democracies fall. We had a great run, but we could be done. And I think it's a serious threat. And I think you think it's a serious threat, but I don't think we've told people that we mean it, that this game can be over, as it has been in other countries, and it's up to them. It's their last chance.
Yeah, I think the role of Americans certainly protecting upcoming elections. We'll see. We have a couple governors' races in New Jersey and Virginia in this year, and then
Supreme
the next
Court race in Wisconsin
cycle
that Mr. Musk has put his billions into. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that these are all going to certainly be tests. I want to sort of be hopeful, because I know that we have seen this globally too, where there's been slides and where there has been the ability to, I would say, claw back democracy from the jaws of autocracy, and in countries like Poland. And I think we have to. There are still governors, mayors, and others that are pushing back. Sometimes you're right that the judicial process is so slow that the action is carried out before and sort of completed even before the judiciary responds to it. But there's been a number of wins of those, whether from labor unions or small business associations and others across the country fighting back against what's happening, what this administration is doing. So, while I know you could certainly have what I would call sort of an extinction level of that happening, or an autocracy that takes hold, a king, as he calls himself, Trump, there are a lot of levers and a lot of ways that Americans can defend their democracy, defend these pillars of democracy that we outline in the Democracy Playbook, and we see it playing out even right now. And it's only 4 weeks into this administration. It feels like 4 years already for many, and there's a lot of people being hurt by this. These are American people. I always sort of wonder how an American president comes in, the first thing that he does is harm his own people. What kind of American president makes that his number one sort of thing that he does? So I have a lot of hope. I want to end with, and hope isn't a strategy, but there are a number of people who are working on the strategy, sort of the pushback, the immediate challenges that are playing out, that are pushing on the doors of Congress to act, even though we don't see Congress acting now. And I don't believe that Republican members of Congress are willing to, at this moment, to stand up to Trump, and I wouldn't bet my money on it. So the change that people seek is going to have to come at the ballot box. That's why we spend a lot of our focus and time, including recently, on this elections piece, and we see it happening across the country, in places like Arizona, where Republican efforts to again look at suppression of ballots in places like Arizona is being pushed back by courts there as well. So it's going to take the effort of everyone and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to really address this challenge.
Well, I like you, am an optimist. I think you can be an optimist and clear-headed about the battle that you face and the consequences of losing. But I do think Americans are decent, that they like their freedom, that they look at a president who is ignoring their lives and instead posting a gold statue of himself in a video on the beach in Gaza. And they say, wait a minute, I didn't vote for that. I don't even understand what that is. But whatever it is, it has nothing to do with me. And that the job of the president has to have something to do with me. So I agree with you. I am optimistic, in part because of the terrible errors that this man is making. Those choices that hurt us so much.
Yeah, I think that's certainly right, and I think I wanted to point to the actions that are being taken by many who are stepping up, from religious leaders to local community leaders that are stepping up to address these challenges head on and sort of are the front guard of this effort. And I think you will see more that will follow, but it is a deeply challenging situation when the levers of the federal government are controlled by one party right now, or those that sort of more closely associated. Yeah. And so this cult of personality with Trump and those around him is a very powerful force, but very difficult to break through to and to have the type of conversations we need to, so that Americans aren't harmed. Well,
I apologize. I thought we were done, but I'm going to have to ask you one more question that is related to this. You've talked about, and I totally agree with you, around the country, Americans are stepping up. They're showing up at congressional offices. They're showing up at town hall meetings. They're engaged in economic protests. They're litigating in every opportunity. They are they're governors standing up. Some judges are doing their job. We have an enormous outcry of people who think this isn't right. On the other hand, we have a large chunk of the country who doesn't know any of that. They don't know it because they watch Fox News or they live in a place where one of the other right-wing networks owns hundreds of television stations, and people aren't paying for news, so that's what they get, and they get it social media that is fractured and siloed. How do we, this reality that you're sharing with me, how do we get it in front of Americans who are subject to this mass propaganda?
Yeah, this has been, I think, one of the most difficult when we were looking at the playbook, thinking through, how did this work in a countering disinformation or misinformation within the news media, in a news media that is no longer what it was 10 years ago. People consuming information, largely many from social media, and sort of ending up in sort of like within the circles that they're listening to, only the information that is, in many cases might be presenting lies or lacks transparency and accountability. And I think, Democrats and sort of others, it's not just Democrats, frankly, sort of Americans have to be able to, one, how do we educate, next generation, this next generation to be critical thinkers, to think through. I think there was one January 6th, someone who was in prison who rejected Trump's pardon, and the thing that struck me that she said was that, when she was she said, I was part of a MAGA cult, and the thing that I lost was critical thinking. This group doesn't critically think, just as you pointed out. Yep. So it's through both education. It's also by creating the alternative social media structures. Social media is not going away. I also, I think whether we engage with influencers and others, I think we have to deal with the reality of how people consume media, and also present the alternatives for them and ways to break free from that cycle, to be able to be open to this engagement. And this includes even more of the old-fashioned, as I mentioned, is grassroots. It's communities. It's having conversations with your neighbor about these issues. We're so polarized that it's incredibly difficult to have these conversations within families, within communities. But we can't give up on that, and we have to break down the silos and walls that are separating us on these issues. And I know, just because we've seen elections swing back and forth, there are a number of Americans, maybe those that voted for Trump, who are very unhappy. They seem to be getting the news that what he is doing is not good for their communities, for their families, and for their future.
Had a friend laid off.
So some of that,
they can feel it.
Some of that is breaking through. I don't think that's going to reach everyone, but I want to have the conversation with those that are open to think through how we sort of go forward today, and then in the future, how do we reshape the democracy so that they're satisfied. The communication, the press issues, press deserts, these are all incredibly important challenges to overcome that I think a lot of us are thinking about, and there's no immediate answer.
The left, since 1954, I think, since 1964, has outsourced its work to lawyers and said, the courts will save you, just litigate it all. And we lost that muscle that was great community organizing, the stuff that has always been the real reason America moved forward, whether it was the wide awakes before the Civil War, or the labor movement, or the suffragettes, or the civil rights movement, you name it. It's mass communication of people to people and then standing up for it that's pushed the country forward. And I think that's what we're beginning. The stuff you're talking about that you see out in the country, I think that's the seeds of that and the forming of a new American majority, which we haven't had in a long time.
Yeah, I think sometimes looking for answers in Washington, where I am, isn't necessarily the answer. I think we're going to get we're going to have to learn from what's happening across the country to better understand how to move forward. So I think that dialogue between, and maybe what's been a disconnect, because we've had these systems in place, and because norms and laws were respected.
Yeah.
Not always. I can name a number of scandals and things that when I was a congressional staffer that we provided oversight. So I know, and you know as well, it's not perfect, but because the pillars, and I hate to sort of go back to these, are cracking or crumbling in some ways, in such a profound way, this is the moment that you're looking at, and a new American democracy. But if it's written in Washington alone, I think it misses some of the challenges and problems that people have felt from Occupy Wall Street to Black Lives Matter to the movements that you've talked about, before. And I think we're all trying to we all have this muscle memory somewhere back there, but we have to fight for it.
All right, that's the last word. Jonathan Katz is the Senior Director of the Anti-Corruption, Democracy, and Security Project in Government Studies at the Brookings Institute. He is, as you heard, deeply thoughtful about the current problems in our democracy and the steps we need to take to fix them. Jonathan, thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, welcome back. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Read that, the democracy playbook they put out. And Jonathan and Norm Eisen wrote it, and, it's the subject of that last interview, but it really is worth a standalone read. All right, let's move forward. I'm delighted to be joined by what I think is this show's resident economist now, Dean Baker, founder of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. He is a writer, an author of books, of studies, and I'm grateful, as always, for his time. Dean, welcome back.
Hey, Edwin, thanks for having me on.
So, wow. Look, I think I want to start this way. The Trump administration is breathtakingly corrupt, determined to create a global trade war, absolutely hostile to our traditional trading and defense partners. So let's look at the impacts, the economic impacts of these traits. And let's take corruption first. I mean, last week, Transparency International released their corruption perception index, which is a respected measure of corruption across the world. And the U.S., dropped 4 points. And that was just based on the Supreme Court's ethics problems. They hadn't even gotten to Trump yet. What is doing business in a deeply corrupt, autocracy like? Is that good for anybody's economy?
Well, it's obviously very bad, and one downside, if you want to use that term, is it generally takes time. So, I mean, we're hearing Elon Musk. I don't know how closely people follow this. I mean, he's awarding himself contracts. So he canceled the contract that the government, that the FAA had with Verizon, and he said, "Oh, we're going to have Starlink because we're much better." Well, I mean, I have no idea. I'm not an expert in this. I haven't studied it, but all I could say is I don't trust Elon Musk's assessment of which contract is better. We had independent people that were making those evaluations, and I'm inclined to think that their evaluations were better than Elon Musk's evaluation, since he has a lot of money at stake on this. But that's just typical. And, again, let's for the moment assume that Elon Musk's deal isn't better. Well, how will we see that? We'll be paying more for the services and presumably not getting as good services. Maybe we'll have planes coming down. Again, I'm sort of mixed thought on this. I mean, we have been seeing many more air incidents since Trump took over. You go, well, did they really do anything to cause that? on the one hand, I don't know that they did. On the other hand, it is just striking. I looked, there wasn't a single air fatality in commercial flying the whole time Biden was in office. We've had, I don't know, 60 or 70 now in just just over a month. So anyhow, but I mean, that's I'm focusing on this, but that's characteristic. We're going to see a lot of bad deals that will go through because someone, Elon Musk being an obvious character, but many others are politically connected rather than them being good government, good policy.
Right. And then the people who didn't get those contracts will sue because there's procurement law. And whether they win or not, all of it takes time, takes money, and is a distraction from something that actually gets the job done or builds our economy. So I guess Americans, if you believe the polls, they credited and they continue to credit the GOP with better stewardship of the economy. How's the new Trump administration doing? Let's just go through a list, like inflation.
Well, I mean, the inflation story, again, how much can you blame Trump? He's new in office and everything, but he's certainly done nothing to bring it down. And, again, keep in mind, this is the guy
I thought he promised he'd fix it on day one, Dean.
Yeah, I mean, that was inane, but that was his promise, So what are we supposed to do? Say, oh, okay, we don't take you seriously. Well, obviously we shouldn't take him seriously, but he ran on that, and my guess is a lot of people did take him seriously. And clearly, I mean, price of eggs is going through the roof. It's a record high. Again, is that Trump's fault? Well, actually, probably it is partly because
some of it.
He fired all the people who were trying to contain it. And
poultry inspectors,
Yeah, I literally have contempt for that. I saw Kevin Hassett, who's chief, head of the National Economic Council, and he was just saying, "Oh, Biden was going about it all wrong. They're killing chickens, and it's spread by geese and duck." I'm not kidding you. I saw him on the news saying this, and go, "What on earth is he talking about? He's killing chickens because infected chickens give it to other chickens. Like, does he not know that, or is he just lying? I really don't know." But anyhow, yeah. So I would.
So that's inflation. How about consumer confidence?
Well, that has gone through the floor for the obvious reason. I know a lot of people in this boat. We're seeing as tariffs. People don't know if they're going to have jobs next month, and it's not just government workers. I mean, the people there have some government, some not directly government contract, but they work for organization that might get money from the government. So I know people work at universities. They're not, they even private universities, but whether it's a state university or private university, they get money from the government. And are they going to get that? Well, depends what Elon feels like. I mean, it is kind of mind-boggling. And so, yes, that undermines consumer confidence.
I can't believe what I've heard. I pay such close attention, Dean, and I could have sworn you just said the word tariffs. And I think, forgive me, I think you mean taxes on imported goods.
Yes, I do mean taxes on imported goods. And here, too, it's kind of incredible and still gets me angry that the media will say, oh, Trump's going to impose tariffs on China. He's going to impose tariffs on Canada and Mexico. He's imposing taxes on the goods we import from China, Canada, and Mexico. And everyone should understand that. There's not, Trump, and I have no idea what goes in his head. I don't want to be in his head. But, he talks about it like China's going to give us a check. We're going to impose tariffs on China, and they're going to give us a check for however much money, $100 billion or whatever he thinks he'll get from it. China doesn't give us any money. We pay the money, and this is a huge tax increase. And again, I just don't understand. One, the media reporting, and two, the Democrats. You're as old as I am, more or less. We remember in Clinton, they were yelling, "Oh my God, biggest tax increase ever! Then Obama, biggest tax increase ever." This is much larger. His taxes on imports are much larger than either the Clinton or Obama tax increase. So you just go shoe on the other foot. What would the Republicans be saying if Obama or Clinton had proposed a tax increase on this side? They'd be screaming bloody murder. I don't hear it from the Democrats.
Well, there's so much to talk about. I mean, that abomination in the Oval Office yesterday. It kind of sucks all the oxygen out of the room.
It was
at the beginning of the show, I played Ronald Reagan. I played the tape of him saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall." There was a time when even Republicans, they understood that our prosperity is dependent on human freedom. Not this guy. Oh, my God.
Yeah, well, Putin's his buddy. Again, you could have all sorts of reservations about the war, as I do, and I'm sure many people do. But I mean, telling Zelensky, "Oh, you got to give us all your minerals and go cut a deal with Putin." I mean, again, I think it would be great to have a ceasefire, but to not understand that that Zelensky needs some guarantees that he's not just going to go, "Okay, good." All's good. That's what Zelensky was saying. It was pretty straightforward. And they were acting like, oh, this is crazy. How could he ask for guarantees?
Well, I mean, right. It's not like we were offering to give him anything new, So, okay.
No, we're offering to take away his minerals. The only thing I could say, and people should know this, Trump has this absolutely crazy idea of the value of the minerals in Ukraine. He's talking about $500 billion. And again, I claim no expertise on it, but I've read some things from people who are experts. They're saying maybe you'd get $3 billion a year out of mining their minerals. And, if we get half of that, I mean, it's not altogether trivial, but that's not going to get you to $500 billion.
No, it's not going to get you to $500 billion. But we could lose $500 billion in market value. I understand the markets are jittery.
Well, understandably, a couple things here. I've written on this, others have. The markets, ignoring Trump for a second, the price-to-earnings ratios are very, very high. They're comparable to what we were seeing at the peaks of the bubble, the stock bubble back in the late 90s. We're a little bit lower, but we're comparable to that. And so that raises a real risk. I mean, the implication when you have that high price-to-earnings ratios is that people are expecting real big profits. And then you go, okay, well, are we likely to see that? And clearly what has been the engine, I mean, it's not ambiguous. You can see the stocks have really gone up. So the big hopes for artificial intelligence and the prospects, I mean, I think there are clearly going to be benefits from artificial intelligence, but the question is, are you going to have these massive profits that they're banking on? I just don't see it, and particularly with this innovation from China, DeepSeek, that they seem to be, cutting edge. They're with our best AI, and they're a tiny fraction of the price. So I don't see how they're going to get the massive profits. But the long and short is, even if you didn't have Trump there, I think you might see real problems with the market. But then having Trump there, who's running things, people have been saying like a TV game show, that's wrong, reality TV show, who's going to be the winner, that's not a good way to run an economy. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we do see the market take a big hit.
Yeah. Dean, remind me, how many quarters did we have job losses when Biden was president?
This is, again, Biden got so little credit for the economic performance. I mean, we didn't have a single month of job loss, much less quarters. And
wow.
He came in, and again, it's remarkable that how the collective forgetting. When he came in, the economy was going nowhere. We had in the 3 months before he came in, the last 3 months of the Trump administration, 2020, we averaged 140,000 jobs a month. At that rate, it would have taken us 5.5 years to get back the jobs lost in the pandemic. Instead, we got back in a year and a half. And I was following this closely. My friend Jared Bernstein was the head of the – well, he wasn't then head. He subsequently became head, but he's on the Council of Economic Advisors. And they pushed through the recovery package, which was a big risk. They all understood that. And they had a lot of people, including people like Larry Summers, jumping up and down, yelling and screaming. It's irresponsible. Well, it got us back to 4% unemployment by the end of the year. No one expected that. That was really a great thing. Workers got jobs. That was really a great thing. And we did have inflation, of course, but everyone had inflation. And again, you could yell about Biden, but it's just the reality. They had inflation in Germany. They had it in France. They had it in Canada. They had it everywhere. So you want to say Biden did all that? I mean, it's kind of crazy. So, they took a big risk. Again, they took a lot of criticism for it. But it's hard to say that wasn't the right thing. It was a great story. People got jobs, and we saw wage growth. Wage growth outpaced inflation under Biden. I mean, I can go on through the rest of the show saying...
Yeah, and equities went way up for filling people's pension funds. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm not the biggest fan of the stock market, but again, that's just the reality. You saw very good growth in the stock market. So,
and now,
so again,
the Trump's jobs numbers are weak, I think, compared.
Well, we have 1 month that was actually Biden, so that was January. So the way the survey works, it's done in the week of the pay period of the 12th. So that was still during the Biden administration. So you could look for things, expectations. But this month we're getting a report on Friday. My bet is it will not be good. My bet is we will see very weak job growth. I don't know if the unemployment rate will tick up. I mean, we're not seeing large-scale layoffs. We did see a jump in unemployment claims towards the end of the month, but that probably won't appear in the data. But I'm betting that we're going to see a lot less hiring for the reason I was just talking about a moment ago. Everyone's uncertain. So I was talking to someone the other day, a PhD candidate in economics. He said jobs were listed and they're being pulled because universities, other institutions, he's looking at the IMF, he's looking at no one knows what their budget's going to be. So it's just not responsible. I mean, I want to hire someone in that situation. I don't want to bring someone on and then have to tell them 2 months later, we're laying you off because we don't have the money. So I think we're going to see a bad job number for February. And again, that one will be on Trump because that's, it's just easy to see. You're going to see that the two big sources of job growth in the last 2 years, probably further, but I'll just say for the last 2 years, the healthcare sector and state and local governments. And both of those, you're going to see hospitals, nursing homes on down the line in healthcare and state and local governments. They don't know what Elon Musk's going to feel like giving them. I've never seen anything like this, and I can't believe the Republicans could look in the mirror and say this is okay, that here you're passing a budget and then Elon Musk just decides what he's going to spend. Like what? What? I mean, it's bad enough it's the president's deciding it, but it's not even the president. It's Elon Musk. We thought this was decided long ago that if Congress allocates money, and again, the president signed it. They might not like Biden, but it was signed by a president. Then it's supposed to be spent. That's the law. But they're just ignoring that for now.
Do you have any idea what the Fort Knox visit is all about?
This is an old right-wing conspiracy theory. I don't know how far back it goes, but I've heard it, I don't know how many times, over the years, that there's no gold there. It was all stolen, and I don't know who. I gather it was the Jews, but it's crazy. But they're going to go. I don't know if they've scheduled it yet. Again, Elon Musk is supposed to be about eliminating government waste. Well, this is government waste because, if you or I were to go to Fort Knox, we'd have to get a commercial plane ticket. We'd probably fly coach. It wouldn't cost that much. When Trump and Musk go there, Air Force One, God knows how much security, probably going to cost us $10-15 million just for a stupid photo op. And they'll go, we had to make sure the gold was here. It's absolutely crazy. And again, a lot of the stuff they've been doing, I couldn't believe, you probably heard the story about tens of millions of dead people getting Social Security. And it was just because they didn't understand their coding system. They have an antiquated computer system, which is known. You can make fun of them for it, but Congress won't give them the money to modernize it. It would cost a lot. So you just make.
So instead, let's just break it. Yeah.
Yeah, but anyhow, with their coding system, anyone that they don't have a date, it defaults to, I think it's 1875. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that was it. Right. So you have all these 150-year-old people getting Social Security, and it's just they just didn't have a date in there, and there are very, very few. And again, there's analyses. It's one of these things like you don't have to start from scratch. Social Security, the administration analyzes the extent to which they have people that continue to collect after they're dead, because it does happen. Obvious reason. Someone in a family dies, they don't call up the Social Security Administration first thing and say, stop sending the check. So it's common for, someone to get one or two checks after they're dead, and they get most of that back. It'd be great if you could say it never happened, we got it all back, but God, it's a huge system, and there are going to be some mistakes, and that's the world. But it's a very small amount. I remember I looked into this a few years back. It was like 1,000% of their benefits go to dead people. It's not why, when we talk about Social Security facing shortfalls, that has nothing to do with it. And, if Musk had taken a few minutes just to read up about it, he'd know and wouldn't be running around saying utter nonsense about tens of millions of dead people getting Social Security.
What's this threat to make, forget what we see in Fort Knox? Crypto is going to be our standard.
The whole crypto thing, again, you want to talk about waste. What the hell is crypto? It's literally nothing. The only use, and at this point, I don't know, we've been around 15, 20 years. How long have we had this stuff? It's not new anymore. The only use anyone's ever identified is for carrying on illegal transactions. So if someone wants ransom, they want $5 million, $10 million in ransom. Well, it's very inconvenient to get $100 bills. It's a lot of $100 bills. So what do? You can do it with crypto, and it's all very efficient. So it's good for that. Obviously, drug dealing, arms smuggling, the whole list of illegal transactions, it facilitates that. But apart from facilitating illegal transactions, what is the use? And I've known people, my friend Paul Krugman, you've probably seen some of his stuff on this. He challenged it. He goes, tell me, what do you use it for? Invariably, I'm sure he's had more people give him answers than me, but it's usually like, we could do this, this, that, and that. And you go, you could do this, this, that, and that with the banking system without crypto. We have a modern banking system. You want to do electronic transfers? I do it all the time. I'm sure you do. We all do. It doesn't offer you anything that we don't already have with the current banking system.
Do you want to take some time and explain this, I thought, pretty interesting article you wrote that you called The Elite's Big Lie on Inequality?
Yeah, this is something that I find very much central, and really it's been a focus of my writing for I don't know, probably 15 years or longer. There's this idea that the market generates inequality. So the idea is that we have a market out there and it generates inequality, and therefore, bothered by inequality, we need to tax the money away from the rich people and give it to people who need it, which I'm fine with. But the problem, the big lie here, is that the market just did it. And the point that I've made in much of my work is we structure the market. There is no the market. We structure it. And just the most obvious way that I talk about, both because it's very important in terms of, its economic significance, but also just it makes, to my view, at least the point very clear, is patent and copyright monopolies. These are created by the government. And again, I understand the rationale. We're giving people incentives to innovate, incentives to do creative work. I understand that. That's true. But the point is, this is a government policy. It's not the market. And we have alternatives. Both we could support innovation, support creative work different ways. Innovation, at least until recently, the National Institutes of Health spent $50 billion a year financing biomedical research. I know the industry does more, but we could up that. We can make it $100 billion. We can make it $150 billion. So we could replace research that's done by the industry with a patent monopoly. We could replace it with open research paid for by the government. But that's again, it's a policy choice. A lot of people get very rich from government-granted patent and copyright monopolies. Again, my poster child for this is Bill Gates, that he's one of the richest people in the world because the government will arrest people who make copies of Microsoft software without Bill Gates' permission. So it's not the market. It's how we chose to structure the market, and we could do it differently. And again, there are other things I talk about in that piece and other pieces. The structure of the corporation, corporate governance. Corporations don't exist in the market. Corporations are created by the government. You and I could form a partnership, and we would be both liable for anything the partnership did. So they could take our home, they could take all our assets because we're just two individuals. But we form a corporation, and then ideally the corporation doesn't do it, but sometimes they mess up. They pollute the environment. They cause damage in other ways. Well, they sue the corporation, and they could take all the corporate assets, and we walk away scot-free. That's not the market. That's how we chose to structure. And again, I understand the argument for a corporation. It makes sense, but we shouldn't pretend that that's just the market. And one of the things when we create a
the light went on for me when I think you described what we did in the 90s in globalization. And you said, you know what? We decided that frontline manufacturing workers were going to have to compete against people who get paid nothing in China in the 90s. But we said, you know what? If you're a doctor in the United States, it doesn't matter if you're a doctor in Canada, working with the same, practically with all the same skills and trades, you don't get to work in America. Americans aren't competing against those doctors. We protected some industries. We sold out others. And that's policy.
Yeah.
That's not that. I mean, the market is the market, but it's structured by policy.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it was 100% predictable result. I mean, it's just, it was devastating to large parts of the country that when we opened up our manufacturing sector to trade with China and other developing countries, workers were working for a fraction of the pay that our workers got, particularly if they were good union jobs. They got, you're looking at workers getting $1 an hour, and obviously you can't compete with that. We lost millions of manufacturing jobs, and many of the ones that still exist, they pay much less than used to be the case 25, 30 years ago. And again, we could have done the same thing with doctors and other highly paid professionals. And I don't know how many times I've had conversations with economists. They usually first look at me blank-faced. Well, that's not trade. I'm going, well, actually, the doctors could come here. They just can't work here as doctors. That's what we don't allow. So it's a trade issue, and then they invariably go, well, it'd be complicated. And I go, well, it's complicated actually with manufactured goods too. I mean, if you look at the negotiations, they spend a lot of time, deciding what's our regulations were permissible, what were violations of trade. So yeah, it's complicated. It's all complicated, but they're willing to put in the effort to expose their manufacturing workers to competition that it really didn't even come up with doctors.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's fascinating. And I assume that the incoming administration has thought like not 1 second about any of this because they've just said to Elon Musk, take what you can and cut us in on the deal.
It sure looks that way. I mean, it's the level of cynicism that we're seeing. It really is kind of mind-boggling, and you just see it at every step along the way with the administration. And I mean, the Zelensky affair, it crystallized that if we ever had any doubts. I mean, and this is just incredible cynicism.
Yeah, Dean, that's got to be it. We've run out of time, but always great to catch up.
Thanks a lot for having me on. Good talking to you again.
You bet. All right, everybody, that was Dean Baker. We're going to turn to Wisconsin and broader topics as well with Dan Schaefer when we come back in just a moment.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, Dan Schaefer is back. He is, of course, award-winning veteran Milwaukee journalist who publishes a weekly opinion column called I'm say it wrong every time, Recombobulation Area. And I think that's now part of Civic Media, and Civic Media is a fabulous contributor to the independent media landscape. They're working to fill the gap in Wisconsin that corporate news seems incapable of filling. And Dan, I believe, aren't you the Civic Media's political editor now?
That's correct. Absolutely.
That is great. That is really first rate for Civic Media and really good for Wisconsin.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
All right, let's start here. It was October of 2016. The Access Hollywood tapes come out, and Americans hear Donald Trump bragging about grabbing women in the crotch. And for a moment, his campaign is in trouble. But without an alternative, the Republicans circle the wagons, Dan, and they save him. After he broke the law and blackmailed Ukraine, he was impeached, and again, Republicans circled the wagons and protected him. And it happened a third time after the insurrection on January 6th. But every time we learn something new and we get better at holding him accountable. Dan, we have got to hold him accountable for that horrific capitulation to that war criminal Putin we saw yesterday in the Oval Office.
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. It just seems like Trump is coming in to try to really remake the, kind of post World War II, stability that we've had in the world for a long time. And it just seems like, capitulating to Putin, the way he reacted with Zelensky, it's just some absolutely ridiculous behavior. But I guess, is it surprising? I'm not. I can't say I'm all that surprised by the tenor that this took, especially coming from J.D. Vance in particular. It's I remember there was that viral clip from a couple of years ago talking about J.D. Vance. I think it was after Russia invaded Ukraine, and he just talked about how he didn't care, and doesn't care that a dictator is invading one of their neighbors, and it just seems like that's the type of policy that they're going to be implementing now. It's frightening.
Right. It's terrible. But not being surprised is different than not being disgusted. I mean, yep, you knew it was going to happen, but it's still disgusting. And I think Americans are going to be appalled by it. And you know how these guys work. Suddenly they're going to blame somebody else. They're going to change the subject. They're going to try and say, oh, it was just banter. We didn't mean it. We just want them to pay us a little bit. Whatever it is, they're going to try and play it down and rescue themselves, because I think universally Americans were disgusted yesterday.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So let's not let them off the canvas this time. I mean, one thing we Democrats, I speak for myself, Democrats, but people on the left are terrible at, is like take the knife out and cut his throat when he's down. The other guys do it gleefully.
Absolutely, and I think it's just a reflection of how how discombobulated the Democrats seem right now, and it just seems like this seems like a moment where you could really have a pretty obvious message to people about something, and I just wonder if we're really breaking through the noise and hearing those messages at this moment. Hard to say.
I mean, the messages, thank goodness, are coming from the bottom up. And let's talk about that. You had some town halls in Wisconsin during the congressional recess, and some of them, some of the very Republican districts. I think you had one in Oshkosh with Representative Glenn Grothman. It didn't go exactly as planned.
No, that's right. There were a couple of them, that really, I think, caught some of those Republican representatives off guard. And I think one was with, like you said, Glenn Grothman in Oshkosh had one of these where, quite a few people showed up. There was another with Republican Congressman Scott Fitzgerald in Washington County, probably one of the reddest counties in the state of Wisconsin. It's kind of like right in between being, a suburban area and a rural area. So it's just kind of the sweet spot for Republicans in the area right now. And they, Fitzgerald was really caught off guard by, hundreds of people who had showed up at that forum. And I think that's really telling that I think Fitzgerald's is probably the most conservative district in the state of Wisconsin. Obviously, like I said, Washington County there is probably the most right-wing district there. And he's met with, some real stark opposition. And I think it's, in particular to what Elon Musk and the Doge project are up to. And also, the efforts on Ukraine. We saw some signs, some backlash on, those on Ukraine and some of the, the positions that the Trump administration, J.D. Vance and all have been taking.
And that was before yesterday. Yeah.
And that was before yesterday. That was last weekend. I think, Americans. From what I understand, there have been some other Republican town halls that were going to be happening, and they have since been canceled. One in particular, Derek Van Orden, who is the representative from Western Wisconsin, probably the most closely competitive congressional district in Wisconsin. Van Orden was going to have one of his staffers meet with the public earlier this week, and we had a reporter from Civic Media who was there, and the staffer canceled the meeting after they found out hundreds of people were going to be showing up. And
yes.
so
Oh my God! People want to meet with their representatives.
Have a meeting at all. It was a staffer that saw that 100 people had signed up for this meeting. They had projected about 2025, something like that. And just because there's such an overwhelming response, they canceled the meeting entirely instead of just kind of meeting with some of the people that they originally arranged with. So it does seem like there is some real grassroots energy around Wisconsin standing up and opposing what's happening in Washington.
And I think that's better than if it came from a Democrat, because the Democrats' brand has been beaten up and beaten up and beaten up. I mean, but they can't beat up American people. They can't do the same thing. You can spend $1 billion on going after, I don't know, a candidate running for Supreme Court in Wisconsin, but they can't spend all that money against the people of Wisconsin and expect to win. So right now, I love that this is coming from the bottom up. And they're running for the hills, the cowards.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an important sign. I know there have been some certain groups that have been organizing. Indivisible is one of them. That they have a presence in some of these more rural districts in Wisconsin, and I think it's really important to see people stand up and fight back and make their voices heard in this pretty frightening moment that we're in.
Yeah. And some senators have held sort of virtual town halls. And I understand that the dumbest senator in the nation, who happens to be your Ron Johnson, that worthless rock of a man, he was like saying, Mr. Musk is great. He's saving us all this money. How are the program changes that we've seen affecting people in Wisconsin?
Well, I think, they're in a number of ways. I think, some of the federal, cuts that are coming, or the pause, the freeze, all of these different things, it's been just so chaotic. So to whatever extent that we can really wrap our heads around it, it's there when there was a freezing the federal dollars kind of in the early couple of weeks there, that really disrupted a lot of things in Wisconsin. I think there were a number of, Head Start, childcare, preschool type facilities that had to pause. I know one in Waukesha County had to shut down entirely. And there were, I think a lot of the stuff that's happening with USAID, that's impacting a lot of farmers in Wisconsin too, because they were, producing food crops that were, being, distributed abroad as part of this program too. And I think a lot of like USDA, there's a lot of pretty significant USDA presence in western Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, and we're starting to see reports of those cuts for being really, really disruptive as well. And I think, here in Milwaukee, there were some layoffs at the VA hospital. I know there's a couple people who are people I know who are, veterans themselves or families with veterans. They are pretty worried about having their health care disrupted by what's going on with Elon Musk. And, there was that press event where, Trump was meeting with the cabinet and Elon Musk was there. He's talking about, accidentally ending a program that's, designed to combat
Ebola, nuclear state
abroad.
Ebola too,
like,
right?
Oops, sorry. And so I think those are the types of things we're seeing in Wisconsin, too, as the rubber meets the road here. And it's just like the uncertainty, the chaos, the confusion, it's just really kind of undergirding everything right now. Like in Wisconsin, this is a budget year for us. And people don't really know how that's going to impact the state's 2-year budget. Wisconsin's budget is in a pretty good place right now. It's a $4 billion surplus. But at the same time, I was talking to some people after the governor's budget address about a week and a half ago in Madison, and they're just like, this sounds like a great proposal, but we don't know what's going to happen with a lot of the federal dollars that come through to the state budgets and how that process, like this all might not matter is kind of the response that I heard from some of the folks that I was talking to at the Capitol in Madison a couple of weeks ago. So it's just the uncertainty is really, is causing all sorts of problems in every direction.
Yeah, here in Illinois, I mean, the uncertainty is exactly as you say, but at present, the government is holding almost $2 billion that was allocated for Illinois, and governor can't get it, and it's a huge problem. Huge problem. So you've talked a lot about who votes when, and when Trump's on the ballot in a presidential race, like lots of people show up to vote who wouldn't ordinarily vote, and I think they're going to be badly impacted by some of these changes. But I certainly don't think there's anything that he's doing that's going to motivate him to show up. I mean, that performance, I thought yesterday, I was so disgusted, just so disgusted by that treatment of Zelensky. It made me think of Ronald Reagan and tear down this wall, and just the legacy of even, no matter what party you're in, standing up for human freedom, and this guy not doing it. Do you think maybe he's just lost for the Republicans a Supreme Court seat in your state?
Well, I do wonder, because we're viewing everything right now through the prism of Trump's return to office, of what's happening with Elon Musk, if that's going to, kind of be, if it's going to make this state Supreme Court race that is 1 month from today, Wisconsin goes back to the polls on April 1st for the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. But because I think everything's being viewed through this prism of what's happening in Washington right now, I think, a lot of people are wondering if this is going to look like a referendum on that, and especially a referendum on what's happening with Elon Musk, because he's getting so directly involved in this race. He's put up millions of dollars already through super PACs and contributions to the candidate in Wisconsin. He's tweeted about the race a number of times, about the right-wing candidate, Brad Schimmel, who's running against the more liberal-aligned candidate, Susan Crawford. I think because Musk himself is getting so directly involved in this race, I do wonder if it's going to be, a referendum on Musk, because I think, and I've written about this, we can get into a little bit about the Supreme Court race, but if Susan Crawford wins this race, if the liberal candidate Susan Crawford wins this race, it will likely mean that there is a liberal majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court until at least 2028. Just based on kind of which members of the court, which justices are up for the end of their 10-year terms over the next couple of years. The next couple of years after this one, there are conservative justices that will be up in spring elections in 2026 and 2027. But this is the Republicans' real chance to flip the court. But if Crawford wins, I think it's going to be so important for state courts to be a check and balance on what's happening with Musk, with Trump, and what they're trying to do in Washington. I think this
Absolutely.
is, I see it as a real opportunity for Wisconsin voters to say, even like Trump won the state, and it was the narrowest victory of the 7 swing states. But this could be an opportunity to say, hey, many people in this state voted for Trump, but we still want him to, kind of work within the framework of the law, right? And I think that is a message that will resonate with many Wisconsin voters.
Yeah, I mean, and just because of frankly, because of the U.S. Supreme Court, state maps are now drawn in state Supreme Courts. And that's not just the legislative maps for the Wisconsin legislature. Those are the maps that people run on for Congress. So the control of Congress, as close as it is, may rest on this election. And with all the weird stuff that's happening with the way electors are chosen, maybe the presidency is going to be up for grabs again, and it will depend on state courts. So this is an enormously important election for the whole country. And I know you guys in Wisconsin, you got your own business. It's not any fun to have the rest of the nation always jumping down and saying we need to get involved in Wisconsin and pouring tons of money in and filling your airwaves with terrible ads. I mean, I don't see political ads here in Illinois. So when I travel, it's a shock.
We're seeing almost nothing but political ads at this point in Wisconsin. Now that we're past the primary, we're into the kind of the general election cycle in the spring. It's just everywhere, and it's not just that. There's a race for state superintendent. There's race. There's a constitutional amendment on the ballot that conservatives are trying to use to get certain Republican voters to the polls to try and have a constitutional amendment that enshrines voter ID into the state constitution. They're clearly doing this to try to play to the MAGA base, to try to get more voters out. And so, I think this is part of the discussions that a lot of people are having in Wisconsin. And like you mentioned, Trump was really effective at getting some of those, what we call low propensity voters, getting people out to the polls. But that didn't necessarily translate in the same ways in other races, like for, Tammy Baldwin, Democratic senator. She won in Wisconsin by a narrow margin as well, even as Trump carried the state. And so I think you look at the type of electorate, and as we're kind of seeing this realignment, Trump had the highest popular vote total in the state of Wisconsin's history when he won last fall. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the people who are showing up in a presidential election are going to show up in a spring election. I think it was about 3.5 million people that voted last fall total in Wisconsin. The typical turnout, like a high range of a turnout for a Wisconsin Supreme Court race is about like 1.5 million or 2 million people. So it's a much different electorate, and I think that might play to the Democratic endorsed candidates' advantage in certain cases, because I think nowadays those more reliable voters, the people who show up in every election, spring elections, special elections, their school board races in their hometown, whatever it might be, that has tended to skew more liberal, more Democratic in
that's a
recent
change.
years. So I think, we always see super, super high turnout in Dane County, in and around Madison, for every election. It doesn't matter if it's a presidential election or some sort of special election, spring election, whatever it is. So I think it's those types of voters who show up in every election. But I know that, with all the Musk money, with all of the rest of it, money from the U-lines, they always put a ton into Wisconsin. Like, that's going to have a pretty significant impact on reaching people. And clearly Schimmel is running to try to just be a MAGA Republican. He said favorable things about the January 6th insurrectionists, the people who stormed the Capitol. He talked about, he said that those people were treated unfairly by the legal system. And, he's clearly just running to say, like, hey, well, Donald Trump won Wisconsin last fall. Let's just do the Trumpiest possible campaign to try to get people back to the polls in April. I don't know if that's going to work for him, but it's definitely been what his strategy has been in the last few weeks.
I think Americans are fed up with it. And if you guys are really the country's first referendum on Elon Musk, I know that's how Ben Wickler and the Democratic Party in Wisconsin is pitching the race to the rest of the country to raise money. But if that's what it feels like in the state, then I'm feeling much better about our prospects. Elon Musk is as popular as a Chicago alderman? He's not, right?
It's interesting because I don't know if the liberal energy is there. The opposition is definitely there for Musk, for Trump, for people wanting to have their say. I just don't know if people are fired up, because I think, we're seeing these like terrible favorability ratings for Musk himself, but it's also like you're not seeing super high approval ratings for, like, let's say Democrats in Congress, right? And that's more of like a national level type of thing. I think there is some frustration, but I do worry if that's going to be, kind of part of it too, that people are not, as motivated by their leaders. And, if we've got a very busy stretch coming up here in Wisconsin. Both of the candidates, Brad Schimmel and Susan Crawford, are doing a number of public events in the coming weeks. There's a debate happening on March 12th. I imagine there's going to be a whole lot of attention to this race, just like it was 2 years ago when the court was on the line, when Janet Protasewicz won to flip the court. She won with an 11-point victory. And, that ended up being the most expensive state court race in American history. I think there was more than $55 million pumped into that race. And I think just about every political observer in Wisconsin is expecting that number to, this year's number to eclipse that one in the spending on the race. So, there's a lot of, and I think, because of Musk in particular, the Republicans have had the edge in fundraising in this race thus far. That was not the case 2 years ago with Democrats who were, that was kind of, the way I've been kind of thinking about it is 2 years ago was the culmination of this years-long effort to win back the majority on the court, which liberals had not had in Wisconsin for, 15 years, if not more. And I think that was the culmination of that project. And now it's a little bit different because you're, kind of defending that majority instead of trying to make, vote for a change. And I think that, creates a different dynamic for one as well. But I think this also kicks off 6 consecutive years in Wisconsin that we will have a Wisconsin Supreme Court race on the spring election ballot. So it is kind of the beginning of a new, chapter here for what we're looking forward to in Wisconsin.
Well, these Supreme Court races are so important. I mean, in North Carolina, they're right. The loser in that race, the last one, and he lost. They've recounted, is going to the court to try and throw out 65,000 votes. And they're seriously considering it, the Republicans on the court. So this notion that voters get to decide is on the ballot everywhere. That's what gerrymandering was about.
It absolutely is, because in Wisconsin, too, you think back to what was happening with the Trump campaign's challenges to try to overturn the election in 2020. Like, Wisconsin Supreme Court came the closest of any state court in the country to siding with the Trump campaign in one of their challenges. It was a 4-3 vote, and at the time, it required the one kind of, swing justice who, almost always aligns with the conservatives. But in the case of, basic fundamental democracy, he sided with the 3 liberal justices. This was Justice Brian Hagedorn. And so if we were, if Brad Schimmel wins again, I have no doubt that he would be siding with the more extreme conservative justices and not be, kind of a more swing vote like Hagedorn. And so, you would have to call into question whether your votes are going to count in 2024 and beyond. And let's not forget, too, these are 10-year terms. For these races, right? And it's not just, we're electing somebody who's going to be on the bench for, the immediate future in Wisconsin. If whoever wins this race is going to be on the bench until 2035, that's a really far-reaching implication for this. And I think, whether it's, coming gubernatorial elections in the midterms or presidential elections, like, there's a lot of those that will happen over a 10-year term. So I think it's really important for those of us who really care deeply about democracy in the state of Wisconsin, in the country at large, to pay close attention to this race and hope that Susan Crawford prevails.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that gives me some hope is, I look at your stuff. The recombobulation area is growing. You have, reporters contributing. You're now a big part of civic media. I just think this is so important to the fight against mis and disinformation in the state. And I know you go on radio shows like this all the time up in Wisconsin and here. All of this is part of, trying to find ways to connect with people who, aren't paying for news and they got other things on their mind. They maybe drop in and out, but it's really important that we, share this kind of conversation with our neighbors and our community members and our friends, and so that they know what's at stake.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'm of course a big believer in independent media. And I think in Wisconsin, we've seen so many of the kind of corporate chain media that has really shrunk the ability for them to, to cover news, to talk about things, to, have commentary and different opinions and having different voices. And that's what, to a certain extent, but we're trying to be an oasis in the news desert with recombobulation area, with what we're doing across the civic media network, and continuing to grow and all of that. So I think, the role of independent media is never been more important than right now.
I agree. And it's never been more vibrant than right now. Independent media is rising to this incredible challenge in ways that, weren't certain and weren't obvious a few years ago. It's really a beautiful thing, and it is a reason for confidence.
I sure hope so. And I think we all recognize that we've got a lot of work to do. So,
yes,
it's going to be a long 4 years for a lot of us, but we've got a lot of work to do. But, these things happen, just one step at a time. And I think Wisconsin, with this spring election, the first real kind of state level race happening in the Trump second term. Of course, it's going to happen in Wisconsin, right? Of course, this is the place that's going to draw that spotlight. Just as we're at the very center of the electoral college map, at the very center of the congressional map, Senate map, all of those different things. Of course, it always comes back to what's happening in Wisconsin, our extremely evenly divided state. We can now say that 5 of the last 7 presidential elections in the state were decided by less than 1%. Everything is always so close.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, Jill Weinbanks is back with me, and Jill is fabulous. She's championed the rule of law, the principle that none is above the law. She worked on the water case. You guys know her from this show and from MSNBC and from everywhere else. Jill, welcome back.
Hi there. Good to see you, Edwin, or speak to you anyway.
Before we get into it, I need to take 1 second to talk to everybody about the news that you just heard, NBC News. It was awful. And let me just tell you that when the reporter takes the time to say, Trump just said that Zelensky's welcome back if he's ready for peace and that he disrespected the White House, that is BS. That's not what happened. They shouldn't report Trump saying stuff like that without calling him out on it. And Trump knows it was BS because that other story they ran about how he's pardoning Pete Rose, who was never convicted of a crime, is also just made up nonsense to change the subject. We are not going to let that terrible president off the canvas this time like we did after Access Hollywood. This disgrace is not one he can change the subject on. Sorry, Jill. I apologize.
Sorry, you are absolutely correct. What happened in the White House was a disgrace and an embarrassment. I am today wearing one of my #Jill's pins for Ukraine. This one is a sunflower with Zelensky's face in the center. I wear Ukraine pins for the next several days, at least in support and honor of sacrifice they're making to protect democracy there and for us. If Putin isn't stopped right now, it's going to be Moldova next, Poland after that, and eventually other places in Europe, other NATO countries, and we will be involved in fighting him if he isn't stopped right now. They are doing us a favor. President Trump should have been thanking him for protecting America instead of demanding that he grovel, and did it without warning and deliberately in front of the cameras. There was no reason for that to happen. None.
No, and in front of, they didn't let AP in the newsroom. They let TASS in. So he was doing it so that Putin, who's in some trouble in Russia, can say, "I delivered America." It's disgusting. It's disgusting.
Exactly.
And,
right.
He changes the subject. He gets out of these things. But this time, I don't think we can let him. I think we just have to every day remind everybody that this is the man who led an insurrection to overturn our country. And now he's changed sides in the middle of the war. And Americans haven't changed sides. I began the show an hour and 2 hours ago, whenever it was, by playing Ronald Reagan saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." We used to stand for something, both parties. So now he's in a war and he's not on our side. What does that mean? Our president's in a war and not on our side.
It's unbelievable, and it would have been as if Franklin Delano Roosevelt had done this to Winston Churchill and tried to use him while leading a country fighting a serious war against a serious aggressor, Nazi Germany. And we are now turning into Nazi Germany.
Yeah, it's gross. It's just let's talk a little bit about how that's happening domestically. Where do we have the rule of law when the coercive powers of government, the investigative power in the FBI, the judicial, the prosecutorial power in the Justice Department are being used for personal vendettas of the presidents?
It's a weaponization of our government in ways that were previously thought never to happen.
Even your friend Richard Nixon didn't do this. He did plenty bad, but this goes even beyond that.
He did try to use the Internal Revenue Service, which Donald Trump has done as well. And he certainly used the Department of Justice to try to conceal the involvement of his campaign and his White House in the original break-in, and to do other bad things. So, and he had an enemies list. So I don't want to forgive him, although I could at least point to some really good things he did, like Title IX, like opening China, creating the EPA. So as bad and as criminal as he was, and the one doesn't offset the other. It doesn't. I mean, when you're a criminal, you're a criminal. Doing good things doesn't erase the crime.
Jill, his attorney general went to jail. John Mitchell went to jail. Yes. It's unthinkable that this Justice Department would hold anybody accountable and send them to jail.
Well, it wasn't his Justice Department that sent him to jail. It was the Watergate special prosecutor. The point is there a special prosecutor appointed here to do that. Yep. And there will be no impeachment, which, remember, Nixon resigned because the Republicans, his party, the Republicans, went to him and said, "We have seen the evidence. You will be convicted on a trial on impeachment at the Senate if you don't resign." And he resigned the next day because he saw he had lost court. There is no way when you have the Republicans who on the morning of the meeting with Zelensky were saying Zelensky is great, he's terrific, and then deleting that post and saying, "I'm so proud of our president for standing up to this dictator." I mean, really? This is insanity. There's no chance that the Republicans are going to get hold of themselves, although let me just say there is one small bit of possibility. You had Senator Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, telling Department of Justice nominees, "Do not ever say to me that you will not obey a court order. You can say you will disagree. You cannot say you will disobey." So that's one thing. And then I think that the shocking event in the White House and the price of eggs and the unavailability of eggs and the fact that neighbors of yours are being fired, and the fact that that's going to hurt not just them and whether they can pay their rent, but think about all the places they go to eat lunch or buy groceries. They can't do, and it's been handled in such a haphazard way that they don't have the proper documents to even get unemployment to carry them through until they can find new jobs. This is a disaster, and the farmers are already suffering because the products that they sold for USAID distribution, there's no more money coming into them. So it's starting to affect real people in real time. And while we might not feel the pain of the benefits the rich people are getting with tax cuts, we will feel it when we're paying more for products, when businesses are going out of business because the people, thousands of workers who supported them are fired and they don't have money to pay for it. So I think there's some small hope that even Republicans, and you've seen what's happened at town halls, Republicans are being screamed at in Republican districts by their constituents who've previously voted for them, saying you've got to stop this madman.
Right. Well, if we can get Donald Trump into the 30s in terms of a poll, then maybe that will develop some spine. But until then, they're going to stick with him.
But we have to worry about the part in the meantime, and they're doing things that, we don't know. We're waiting for a decision on whether Donald Trump can randomly fire against the law Hampton Dellinger, who is in charge of the Office of Special Counsel to protect all of the federal workforce and whistleblowers as well. And if he can get away with that, if the court upholds that, even though there's no cause, he wasn't given notice, he just was let go without any reason, despite his appointment that says he can only be fired for cause. That's scary. They also are taking away reimbursement of legal fees for civil rights cases, and that could certainly get in the way. They have threatened to sue, but Donald Trump has already taken away the security clearance for the lawyer representing Smith in a phony baloney investigation. But if he doesn't have a security clearance, the lawyer, then he can't look at the documents that are against Smith, and that would interfere with his right of counsel. So they're doing serious damage to the legal system. So lawyers are at risk, federal employees are at risk. There's a lot going on, and it's almost too much for people to take in. My advice is pick one thing that really grabs your attention, focus on that, let someone else focus on something else, and you just do your job on that one thing and make sure you get involved in voting in 26 to throw out the Republicans so that at least in Congress we can stop some of the bad actions of Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that there is, their view of justice is like Stalin's. Show me the man and I'll show you the crime, right? You want him? Don't worry, I'll find a crime, we'll get him. And that is not the rule of law. That is just power in its rawest and ugliest.
Columbia, when the high-ranking assistant U.S. attorney resigned, rather than do a phony case against a bank that had federal money that the government wants frozen, even though there's grounds for doing it, and she said, that's not legal, I'm not going to do it, and I'm going to resign, and she did.
Yeah, a lot of good people. There are a lot of martyrs here, people who are sacrificing their careers to do the right thing. The problem, of course, is that there are a lot of trolls behind them, eager to take those positions of power and do terrible things.
Well, that's, it's an interesting question, Edwin, as to whether I would advise Department of Justice, for example, employees to resign in protest or not. And I come up with no, you shouldn't, because you will be replaced by someone who will carry out these bad orders. As long as you can do your job, you should keep doing it. If you are ordered to do something illegal and will get fired, okay, get fired and go public with what it is so that you can make people aware of it. Otherwise, we're not going to get the information about what's going on. People are just going to do illegal, immoral, unethical things.
There are other countries that are organized differently than ours. The equivalent of their Justice Department is a fourth branch of government. They don't let it be part of the presidency because they are worried about precisely where we find ourselves. And every president since Nixon until now has taken care that the Justice Department should be independent. These guys have taken care that it should not be. Do we need a structural change where we have a fourth branch where it's really protected from this?
Well, good question. And after Watergate, because of the involvement of the Department of Justice in the conspiracy to cover up, there were rules passed that prohibited for example, conversations between the White House and the Department of Justice. Because one of the things that happened was that the head of the criminal division, who was otherwise, he had been my direct boss originally at the Department of Justice, Henry Peterson, very much admired and respected, got in over his head. He wasn't a politician. He got to be head of the criminal division based on actual merit, and then got suckered into giving information to John Dean. And so the rule was set up, there could be no conversations with anyone at the White House in order to protect against that. Does it have to be put into law? That's pathetic that it does. But yes, I think at this point we do. It has always been the independent agency in the executive branch. It has always been, we take an oath to the Constitution. When we go to court, we say, on behalf of the people. And Edwin, I was so proud to go to court and say that. And now have people saying, well, we're just Donald Trump's lawyers. You had the interim U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia who said basically that. He represents Donald Trump and his agenda. And anyone who won't do that is out. That's not how it's supposed to be. So, yes, we do need, maybe we need a separately elected attorney general who will be free of this, and then we won't need special counsel, special prosecutors, because the Department of Justice will be totally separate and independent.
Sad.
I'm not
so sad.
We should be able to handle this in a better way than we're living with right now.
Yeah. And the FBI, I mean, the Justice Department, it doesn't, I mean, the FBI is the front line for investigations and law enforcement, and they too look to be breached.
Absolutely, and Patel has already been acting in ways that exceed the boundaries of investigations for the FBI. And by the way, I didn't mention her name, but I think because she was the head of the criminal division in the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., Denise Chung is the one who resigned just a few days ago. And she deserves our praise, as does Sassoon, who resigned as the interim
in New York
attorney, Southern District.
Yep. It's how do we defend ourselves? I mean, we have to defend ourselves in court, I guess. It's an expensive proposition, but I don't know where else we would do it.
Well, I would say right now, so far, the courts have been a bulwark against some of the crazy, crazy stuff. I wish I felt more secure that get to the Supreme Court that they would do what precedent requires. Unfortunately, I don't have that confidence right now. But so far, it has worked. We're waiting for a decision from the Supreme Court about Hampton Dellinger. But, there's so much going on. As they say, everybody can't do it. I don't even know what UFC stands for. Do you? But Kash Patel wants to bring the UFC to the FBI, which is, it's a fighting organization, the ultimate fighting champion.
Yes, it is.
What are you talking about? How does this relate to anything? And it's really endangering our national security, and that's something that we shouldn't ever forget about, is that Bondi has eliminated Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and anything else that might get the people FARA. You don't have to register anymore because no one's going to get prosecuted.
Bribery is legal with these guys.
They aren't going to require any kind of transparency anymore. And so it's just crazy. And we are in this danger, and I don't know how we can do this except by protest and by voting against, by letting huge numbers. if you are in a district represented by a Republican, you must let them know at these town halls. Now, the Republican Party is saying, don't have town halls anymore. We don't want to hear this. But you also have to let your Democratic representatives know how strongly you feel so that they will keep up against this onslaught and that they will do what they can. And I am looking for someone that I could interview to find out what are the powers of the minority party? What can Democratic senators do against the rules of the Senate that are holding back their ability to stop any of this? How much can they delay all of the nominations that are pending right now? They should not vote for one single person.
Yes,
no
but
one.
they have, haven't they? They voted for a lot of them.
Well, mostly it's been done on a straight party basis. Fetterman has voted for some, and there are a few who have, and there are a few Republicans who have voted against them. But
Marco Rubio got a lot of votes, Jill, and he was one of the club, and they voted for him, and he sure has proven himself this.
He was a normal, ordinary a nomination, and then we saw him walk Zelensky out and say, basically, don't come back again. You're not welcome here. That is not a normal person. I hope he resigns in shame at his participation in the or apologizes in the same way. What was it, General Mark Milley, who marched Lafayette Square and then went, oh, God, I shouldn't have done that. I was in uniform. That's totally against the rules. Someone needs to apologize for that. I'm sorry. That's what we need.
Jill, I don't understand TikTok. The TikTok, the law passed, the president signed it, it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yep, TikTok's got to go. I know there's a little loophole that says if there is a bona fide offer on the table, you have 90 days to finish it. There wasn't that bona fide offer, and yet TikTok is still out there going along. I assume because it's so powerful, they want to give Elon Musk the chance to get control of it so he can add it to his media empire. But isn't that just a clear violation of the Supreme Court? Aren't they just ignoring the court? And what does John Roberts have to say about that?
It's slightly different. Ignoring the court would be in this case that is now on deadline, where the court said you must release the frozen funds, $2 billion of frozen funds, by Wednesday at midnight. And then the Supreme Court, hours before the midnight deadline, said, I'm delaying that until we rule. And so that's on hold right now. If the Supreme Court said you must release the funds, these are committed funds, not just appropriated. Appropriated and committed, that means they're spent already. That would be actually disobeying a court order. This is saying I am not going to prosecute a certain class of cases. In the same way that Bondi said, we're not going to prosecute foreign corrupt practices. We're going to let people get away with that because we're just not going to spend our enforcement resources there. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network is a bureau within the Treasury Department that has basically said, well, we're going to change the rules. You don't have to file documents anymore. That's not exactly ignoring a court order. That is just saying I'm not enforcing the law. It is an impeachable offense, though, because the president takes an oath to support and defend and enforce the laws. And he's not enforcing the laws when he says, I'm going to ignore this particular law because I don't like this law. It gets my friends like Manafort in trouble, so we're not going to enforce that one. But it isn't the same as ignoring a court order, which I'm getting close to.
That's a distinction I get. Yep.
Yeah.
I get it. It's acting lawlessly, but it's not acting lawlessly in that way.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Jill, I'm not a lawyer, but I raised one, and I'm a good client of lawyers, and some of my best friends practice law, and it is heartbreaking to see this edifice of law, this practice of that's, generations of precedent and thought and hard work. And when you enter this field, you are entering a multi-generational effort to organize our society in a way that has rules that make it fair for everybody. And to see, like, the government of the United States lighting it all on fire is just heartbreaking.
Fair and predictable. If you don't know what the consequences of certain acts are, it's hard. The ABA, I'm very proud of, has actually started to step in and issue statements condemning remarks about the legitimacy of courts and, not obeying court orders and supporting the rule of law. I expect them to weigh in on the punishment to Covington and Burling, where Jack Smith is being denied the right of counsel by what they're doing. And it's also a warning to all law firms. If you take on representation of people that are not in accord with what Donald Trump wants, you're going to get punished. And, a lot of firms can't afford that. And it's only the firms like Covington and Burling that have the resources to actually take on these big cases. The private practitioner who doesn't have any government contracts doesn't have the resources to do it. We're going to need to raise a lot of money as a society to protect the rights of a lot of people if they can get away with taking away the security clearance of a lawyer who worked in the public integrity section, now at Covington as a partner. It's awful. That's terrible. I mean, we just can't.
For no other reason than he's defending a client they don't like. Yeah.
Exactly. It's all because of Jack Smith that they're doing this, and it's really bad. I mean, the revenge is obvious what they're doing. This is clear revenge and completely illegal, completely. So I'm not
maybe
not
some more aggressive removal of law licenses. Maybe the ABA should step up and say, "I'm sorry."
It doesn't. Think it's state bars.
The state bars should step up and do more.
But I guess
people are abusing their law license for sure.
Yeah. It's.
Folks, I seem to have lost Jill, so we're going to take a break. And when we come back, you know what? We'll go to your calls.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
Jim, kick us off.
Hi, Edwin. I was thinking of the Daniel Webster to South, Lindsey Graham. Now, here's you could stack these two people up in their biographies, and I'm sure it'll be as scintillating as Daniel Webster's, because how he's gotten away with this nonsense, it's absolutely incredible. They keep electing us. I mean, just looking at the guy, and then they go to him, whatever preposterous thing happens. What do you think, Lindsey? Well, let me see. How's my ward chest down here? Can I get elected again? How long has he been a senator, Edwin?
Too long.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. But think about what constituents does he have down there? Are they on opium or what? What? I don't get it. Why would you keep electing this lunatic to the Senate? And I guess you get a jockey for the old timer from Kentucky. His mind slips my mind now. What's his name, Mitchell or whoever?
McConnell.
The guy looks like a turn. He's probably jockeying for that spot. But how about? I mean, how does he come out and say that the president of Ukraine disrespected anybody in that room? How do you say
Which,
that?
of course, was the opposite. The thing he said an hour before was completely different. But the reason he said it, you know why he said it. He said it because his dear leader told him to, and his dear leader wanted to hear it, so he wanted to say it. He couldn't get to a microphone fast enough to say it.
No.
There's no self-respect amongst these people.
No, not at all. I imagine but what kills me is they've got terrific health care. You certainly got a few million stashed away. Why wouldn't you go down why would you go down at one point in your life and say, well, here's what I really think? I mean, what's he got to lose? What do these people have to lose? They're on the gravy train for 20, 30 years. I mean, I don't get it. What do they have to lose?
Well, Jim,
they really
they're costing all of us. It's terrible. I mean, it's
this week was unbelievable. Anyway, every week. Look at January 6th. They whitewashed that somehow.
We're not going to let them do it. Not going to let them do it this time.
Well, God, I to hear from your mouth to God's ears. Everyone. Anyway, Thanks for taking my call. We have a good week.
You bet, Jim. You take care. All right, Paul. I know the shenanigans in the Oval Office meant something to you. You wrote about it. Paul?
You'd have to put me on.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that you look at the last 10 days, the extreme and radical turn in American policy on Ukraine. First, Trump says that Ukraine started the war with Russia in Ukraine. Now, that's kind of like touching your elbows above your head. It's like, no, you can't. No, a country doesn't start what do they do? Invite them over for a fight? No, you can't start a war in your own country with a foreign country. So that's just it's. I don't know if your IQ has to be lower than 39 for you to not understand that, but that seems to be about where the MAGAs are. I think shoe size and IQ they are about the same for them. But then the United States in this UN non-binding resolution votes of 19 countries out of 120 countries votes with China and other totalitarian countries to say that Russia doesn't have to leave Ukraine. Well, that's giving aid and comfort to our adversary. That's treason. And then Trump wants this deal to obtain the rare earth metals from Ukraine's Donbass region, which Russia occupies. So that is perpetuating an armed conflict between nations for profit. That to me seems to be a war crime. And then he does this debacle in the White House with J.D. Vance. I've got to tell you, I have to think that J.D. Vance is smarter than that, but maybe, 3 years, a Yale law degree doesn't. I mean, he was raised by a drug addict, and maybe those shadows are longer and darker than 3 years of Yale law. But what they did, I know they set it up, they staged that to have a negotiation in front of the media. It was a setup. It was a staged setup, I know, so that he could look tough in front of the American people. But he, number one, looked like a complete idiot. I can't stand it that the media is saying this was a heated exchange no, it wasn't. It was J.D. Vance and Donald Trump yelling. Zelensky wasn't yelling. He was he wasn't yelling anymore, raising his voice any more than one would in a normal negotiation behind closed doors. And then what they really did was show the international community how weak they are in negotiations by losing their cool and doing that with both of them in the room and showing that he didn't. I mean, even the reprehensible motives that Trump had to get these metals from Ukraine by shaking them down, he didn't even get that.
Paul, explain this part of it to me. I agree with you. I agree with you. It was awful. But everything about it was awful. But he also was like, you're going to cause World War III. Millions, hundreds of millions of people are going to be dead. You're going to cause World War III. So a guy's country's invaded. He's defending himself, and he's going to cause World War III? Like, I'm sorry. Well, and the United States has something to say about whether there's a World War III. You're supposed to, that's why we have deterrence. That's why we have the strongest military in the world. It's not so that we can kick out senior officers who are black and women just because. It's so that we can protect peace in the world.
Well, and the other thing is about that remark is you don't just say that kind of stuff in international negotiation. You don't just, and that's why I think the one thing that Zelensky said that nobody hears because the media, honest to God, the news media is just as pathetic as always. But they didn't hear. Did you hear? And Trump's yelling at him because you couldn't hear what Zelensky said very well, but I've heard the clip so many times. Trump said, "You don't have the cards. You don't have the cards." And Zelensky said, "This is not cards. This is serious."
Yeah.
That was the one thing that was the most right-on thing that was said.
Well, it was. Let's you and I make sure that this moment of craven capitulation to a war criminal, this moment of switching sides and now being the president and the government of the United States against the people of the United States who stand with Ukraine. Yeah. You know, that's a moment, and let's not let him off the tarp for it. He's trying to change the subject. He's talking about Pete Rose, for God's sake. He's doing whatever he can to make us forget what a traitor he is in the White House, and I'm not buying it.
And why would Pete Rose even take him up on that? Why would he want to dig that up again, even though that he was not convicted?
Rose is dead. There's nothing there's nobody here to talk about. Just he gets to do it by himself. And by the way, Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame, just between us. But
that's fine. But if as it goes, if this happens to me, I would say, don't dig that up again. I don't. Right. It's just not the kind of thing you get past, and whatever happened, happened. Yes, I agree with you, but that's what happened, and that was in Major League Baseball. That was years ago. But the thing is that the international community sees it, and that is going to have far-reaching consequences. Not only first of all, with our allies, but also with our adversaries. They know how to. I was wondering, how is Zelensky going to get out of this? Is he really going to sign this deal? I couldn't imagine. He didn't have to. Trump threw him out. And now everybody knows is that all you have to do, because Trump doesn't know about mediation and negotiation and arbitration, that Trump shows his issues. He doesn't negotiate with his interests. His issues he wears right on his sleeve. And now everybody can say, all I have to do is tweak him, and he'll get all PO'd and kick me out, and then the deal will be scuttled. I don't want the deal. I don't want it. How am I going to get out of this deal? That's what you do, because you know that he is going to go. I mean, bringing all this other stuff about Hunter Biden's laptop, I didn't see it, but people were telling me, you got to see, Paul, because I can't see. You got to see Zelensky's face. It's like, what the F? What? What are you talking about, right?
It was all awful. It was awful.
It was.
All right, Paul, I'm going to move on because a lot of people have opinions about this today, but thank you, as always. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Brian. Bye-bye. Yep, Brian.
Good afternoon, Edwin. Fine show, as always. I think I don't see where Zelensky did anything disrespectful at all. I think the thing... as a matter of fact, I think the whole thing was staged ahead of time by Vance and Trump to humiliate him. And I also I agree with Paul. The news other than your station and MSNBC, the news coverage has been abysmal in terms of being critical of Trump. And I also wanted to say that I don't know if you've ever seen it. I recommend it highly on PBS. Off and on, they've been running a documentary hosted by Rick Steves. It's called The Story of Fascism in Europe, and it traces the rise of evil fascist dictators, Mussolini, Franco, and Hitler. And it says that if it could happen then, it could happen given certain conditions in any country. And I suggest everyone, if they haven't seen it, check it out.
Yeah, Rick Steves is terrific. And he's done some very important work.
Pardon?
Rick Steves is terrific, and he's done very important work in this issue.
Do you think that thing was staged yesterday? ahead of time to humiliate Zelensky?
I think it was planned. Yes. I mean, why would you have TASS in the room? It was there. I don't know if it was. I don't know what their motive. Whether it was just to humiliate Zelensky, but I think it was to take some of the domestic pressure off of Vladimir Putin. He's under enormous pressure in Russia. I mean, bodies are coming back in bags left and right. He can hide them a lot, but he can't hide 1 million bodies. And inflation is out of control in Russia. The economy is weak. People are unhappy. Now, they can't do anything about it. It's not a democracy, but they're really unhappy. But now he gets to say, because TASS was in the room, the AP wasn't allowed, but they allowed TASS. He gets to say, I've just delivered the United States. And it is so despicable. And yes, I think it was pre-planned. J.D. Vance is so over his head here, and Donald Trump has no control. He's a thug, and you act like a mob boss. You're playing a weak hand. And as Zelensky said, yes, I know. Putin already told me I won't last 3 days. Good answer, buddy. Good answer.
Do you think this will lead to that the U.S. is going to break off from NATO completely, and that European countries will continue to assist Ukraine in this?
Well, Trump would like it, but it's not up to him. You know, this is a treaty that has been approved by our Congress, and he doesn't get to abrogate a treaty. I mean, I know he doesn't believe that he's bound by any laws, and John Roberts surely contributed to that, but our country has treaty obligations. And if we don't live up to them, I guess we could be a lawless pariah nation like Iran, like Russia, but that is not who we've ever been, and Americans won't put up with that.
Well, thank you for taking my call, Edwin, and have
As
a wonderful
always.
weekend.
Thank you, Brian.
Bye.
Yep. Max.
Hey, how's it going? Good, I hope. But anyways, I'm listening to your show today, and it was very disturbing. One of the big problems that we have in the good old U.S. of A. is that a lot of Americans are starving. I heard that 100 million Americans get some sort of, I didn't look it up, but I just heard one of my friends told me 100 million Americans get some sort of food subsidy that they can't afford to eat anymore. And the cost of food does not cost that much. We still throw away somewhere of 30% of our food. So we shouldn't be having the food problems that we have in the United States. The cost of food should not be going up as it is. Why is our government letting that happen? And that's the thing, is that the government is letting that happen for a reason, to push more people into the military, so the military can't keep up with the amount of troops that it needs. The other thing is that when we're talking about voting, I'm pretty sure we have 10 million more people. If you had 3 different parties, the people that didn't go vote was somewhere like 90 million Americans didn't vote because they didn't see what the point of voting is anymore. So that we have a bigger problem than people just pressing a button that says D and one that presses R in the United States.
I agree with you. I agree with you. People aren't concerned. I believe there's a majority in America that neither party is able to reach. And that's hard. And I don't think it's the fault of frankly, I mean, Kamala Harris ran a pretty middle of the road campaign. She walked away from a lot of the social issues. Her campaign was full of Republicans, and they still couldn't reach across and get. So there's something strange going on for sure. Hey, Max, it's about 50 million people, not 100 million,
go ahead.
who get SNAP benefits.
All right, thank you.
But there are also, kids in school who get free and reduced lunch. So it may be a little bit higher, but it's about 50 million. It's still a lot of people.
Oh, could I still say something?
Sure.
Okay, so then when you're talking about, I have friends, because I work on sailboats, and I work on sailboats around the world. I worked on Russian boats back in the early 90s and late 80s, and knew people and know people still today from Ukraine. Okay, so the war, when you talk about the Donbass, before Russia collapsed, that was more or less part of Russia. Russia pushed them away because they couldn't afford them. But the people voted. Okay, this is more of a civil war, just like the North and the South, fighting back in 84, 64. It's basically the same thing. The people, it's a little bit different because the people that spoke Russian in the Donbass, the government was actually shelling them because it was taxation without representation, and they were sick of it, and they were voting to separate themselves from the rest of the part of Ukraine, and that's when the war started back in.
I don't think those are quite. I don't think that's quite right.
I could have one of my Russian or Ukrainian friends, talk to once they leave their country. You pick one up off the street. A bunch of them live over here now.
Plenty in Chicago. I hear you, and I want to give you the chance to say what you want to say, but it's a complicated issue in the Donbass, and maybe I'll have somebody on to talk about it in another show. But anyway, as always, I appreciate your listening and your participating. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, too.
Yep.
Right.
Mark, you're next. And then we'll go from Mark to Roosevelt, and that'll wrap us up.
Oh, hey, Edwin. Thanks for having me on. Just came back from grocery. Isn't that what Trump says? Anyway, I wanted to talk about why are we not trying to impeach this guy already? All right? We should all be angry. I'm really angry, and I'm angry enough to call in your show today. He's committed numerous crimes already. I'm sure there will be no lack of crimes to come up with, but how about abuse of power and treason already? We have to try and fight this guy, and what else can we do? So it's not likely to happen. We've got a couple years. We can keep trying to let it happen. And if I'm not mistaken, did the Supreme Court not say that the president can be held liable for crimes if he is impeached and convicted? Did I miss that one?
He needs to be impeached and convicted. But look, that isn't happening. We know the Republicans where they are. If we get back and get control, but it takes 60 votes to, in the Senate, and we've seen these Republicans won't do it. So impeachment isn't the way to protect ourselves anymore.
We can try. We can talk about it.
We have to try a lot of things. We have a budget fight, a huge budget fight coming in the next few weeks. Really important one. And you know what the Democrats are trying to do? The one thing we're negotiating for in the budget is this, that Congress has the power of the purse. And the Republicans won't put it in the law. Even though it's in the Constitution, they want the president to be able to spend all of America's money however he wants. And the Democrats are like, no, this is our fight. Our fight is that the Congress has the power of the purse. It says so in the Constitution, and unless you're willing to double down on that, we won't help you with the budget. That's our fight today in Congress. We have a political fight everywhere because you are right. This man is a menace, a danger to the whole world, and really bad for America. My God, can you imagine raising children with that role model? It's just disgusting.
That's right. And this is war, and we have to do more. I'm ready to do more. I don't know what to do at this point. We have to do more.
Show up at a congressman's office. Say to him what you're saying to me. It absolutely matters. There are tons of opportunities to volunteer, from swing left to indivisible. Really good ways. They'll tell you. They'll use your time well. They'll help. We have to get each other. Everybody in the country has to see what you see, and when they do, we'll throw them out. Anyway, Mark, thank you. I really appreciate your call, but I'm going to move on in the interest of time. Thank you.
Thanks for taking my call.
You bet. Roosevelt, I haven't heard from you in a while.
Double E, thank you for taking my call, my friend.
How you feeling?
Fantastic. How about yourself? I listen to your show. Never miss it. I haven't called lately, but I never miss it. So, the subject, the fiasco, the setup, because that's what it was. It was a setup. Nobody talks about this, but how many people were in that room? Even Rubio was sitting in the sofa, if I remember correctly, in the middle of the sofa.
You're correct. He couldn't squeeze himself back far enough, but yes, that's where he was.
So Double E, just the optics. The optics were set up to intimidate, to put pressure. Okay? And Zelensky's a very smart man, and I'll tell you why. He walked in the lion's den. He walked in, I think, to figure out, is this guy for real what he really wants? He basically wants him to give up the riches, the mines of what he has in his country, in Ukraine. And on top of it, he wants them to grovel. He wants them to bend the knee. He wants him. I knew he wanted that to put on a big show, to show the country and the world that anybody that does business with him has to grovel, has to bend the knee, and then maybe I'll think about helping you. So who benefits? I'll tell you who benefits. The world benefits, because he was talking about showing his cards and all that BS. He's horrible at playing cards, because he showed all his cards. He showed the world how he does business and how he's been doing business as a businessman. And the way you do business like that is not the way you run a country or help your allies or intimidate your allies. So who's going to come to the United States and say, hey, can you guys help us? Yeah, but let's make a deal first before I help you. So he showed his cards talking about Trump. What do you think about that?
I think those cards he showed were mobster cards. I've seen that act in every movie. He thought the guy who was sitting there was weak and he wanted to squeeze him. Turns out the guy sitting there was pretty strong, and he stood up to Putin and Putin's army for years. Now, we've helped. Thank goodness we've helped, because it's good for us. But
and Double E, this guy reminds me of Catch Me If You Can. He does not do business on his own. He needed another guy. He needed JD. He needed JD to be the muscle man. It's just like in a mafia. It's just like in the movies, organized crime. This is organized crime. And all that stuff that they're pulling with Elon Musk, that's an inside job. Everything is connected to organized crime the way this guy operates. And what is he? A criminal. So it stands to reason that a criminal is going to be a criminal, and he continues to be a criminal, and he's been like that all his life. He doesn't have an art of a deal. He does not have the art of the deal. There is no deal with him, because it's all him.
He doesn't spell it D-E-A-L. He spells it S-T-E-A-L. So
that's my opinion, Double E. Thank you very much. But
you bet. It's good to talk to you.
Thank you, and I love your show, man.
Thank you. All right, everybody. One goal going forward: do not let this man change the subject. He's a disgrace. What he did is disgraceful. It was a shame on America. He took the most sacred real estate in our country, the Oval Office, and he shamed it, and he embraced a dictator and embraced invasion of another country, and he did his best to take on, honestly, one of the bravest men on the planet, a guy who we offered, remember, we'll get you out of the country. He said, I'm not leaving the country. I need weapons. And this is when everybody thought that country would fall in 3 days, but it didn't. And it didn't in part because the Ukrainians are tough and they weren't going to have it. And also they were led by a guy who is strong. And, Donald Trump hates that. He wants everybody to be, just his plaything. You know who else is strong? We are, the American people. We are going to be like Zelensky, and we're not going to get eaten by this guy. Stay tough. Do not let him off the carpet for this. I'll talk to you next week.